On December 21, 1943, a lone man stood in the Alaskan wilderness at 42 degrees below zero, watching the wreckage of his plane burn in the snow. He had no survival gear, no food, no map, and no realistic chance of rescue. 5 other men had died in the crash. He was the only one who walked away. What followed was not a story of luck or divine intervention, but of methodical calculation made under conditions designed to kill. For 81 days, Leon Crane survived by refusing to accept that survival was impossible. This is not about heroism, it's about what remains when everything else has been stripped away. Leon Crane was a navigator, trained by the United States Army Air Forces during World War II. His role required precision, the ability to read instruments under pressure, to calculate position from sparse data, to make decisions when visibility collapsed and certainty vanished. On that December morning, he boarded a C-47 cargo transport at Ladd Field near Fairbanks, Alaska, alongside a crew of 5. Their mission was routine by wartime standards: fly supplies to a remote airstrip, return before nightfall. The weather forecast was marginal but acceptable. They took off into gray winter light. Somewhere over the Charlie River drainage, the plane encountered conditions that exceeded forecast. Ice accumulated on the wings faster than the crew could manage. Altitude dropped. Visibility collapsed into white. The pilot fought for control, but the laws of aerodynamics are indifferent to effort. The C-47 struck a mountainside at high speed, tearing itself apart across frozen tundra. Metal screamed. Fire erupted. 5 men died on impact or in the moments immediately after. Leon Crane, seated near the tail section, was thrown clear. He landed in deep snow, disoriented but conscious. When he stood, his hands were already beginning to freeze. The wreckage burned hot enough to melt snow in a wide radius, but the heat would not last. Smoke rose in a column that dissolved quickly into low cloud. He searched for survivors and found none. He salvaged what he could from the debris: a parachute, some scraps of fabric, a few tools scattered in the snow. No emergency rations survived intact, no sleeping bag, no radio that functioned. The realization arrived not as panic, but as a cold, clarifying pressure. He was alone. The temperature was dropping. Night would come in a few hours. He had 2 choices: stay near the wreckage, where searchers might eventually locate him, or walk. Staying meant freezing to death before rescue arrived, if it arrived at all. Walking meant entering a wilderness so vast and hostile that survival was statistically impossible. The decision was not dramatic, it was mechanical. He began to walk. Cold at 42 degrees below zero does not feel like cold as most people understand it. It feels like pressure, like being crushed slowly from the outside in. Exposed skin freezes in minutes. Breath crystallizes in the lungs. Movement becomes effortful, each step requiring conscious force. Leon Crane walked without knowing where he was walking to. He followed the drainage downhill, reasoning that water flows toward larger water, that rivers lead to settlements, that downhill is always a direction, even when direction itself is unknowable. His hands were the first casualty. Frostbite does not announce itself with pain. It begins as numbness, a whitening of tissue, a loss of sensation that spreads quietly. By the time he noticed, his fingers were already rigid, the skin waxy and pale. He wrapped them in strips torn from the parachute fabric, but the damage was done. His feet, protected by military-issue boots, fared slightly better, though each step sent sharp cold through the soles. He walked until darkness made further movement dangerous, then stopped. Building a fire without functional hands is nearly impossible. He managed it anyway, using his wrists and forearms to manipulate kindling, blowing on embers until they caught. The fire was small, barely enough to keep hypothermia at bay, but it was enough. He did not sleep. Sleep in those conditions is death. He sat close to the flames, feeding them carefully, conserving energy, waiting for dawn. The night stretched endlessly. Wind moved through the trees with a sound like distant voices. Nothing else moved. When morning came, he extinguished the fire and continued walking. His body had begun to fail in measurable ways. His hands were now black at the fingertips, tissue dying from lack of blood flow. His face was raw, wind-burned, cracked in places that wept and froze. Hunger had not yet become unbearable, but weakness was setting in. He had no food, he had no weapon, he had no knowledge of what plants or animals might exist in this region, and even if he had known, his hands could not grip, could not hold, could not kill. He walked for days without seeing a single sign of human presence, no trails, no cabins, no power lines or roads. The landscape repeated itself endlessly, a monotony of white, interrupted only by the dark vertical lines of spruce trees. Time began to lose structure. He marked days by sunrise and sunset, but the days themselves blurred together. His mind, deprived of stimulus and warmth, began to fold inward. He spoke aloud to himself, narrating his actions, maintaining the habit of language even when there was no one to hear it. By the end of the first week, he had covered perhaps 30 miles. It felt like 300. His boots were disintegrating, the soles separating from the uppers. He wrapped them with parachute cord, a temporary solution that would not last. His clothing, designed for aircraft interiors, not wilderness survival, was inadequate. He layered what he had, but layering only works when the base layer retains heat. His did not. He was losing the battle against cold incrementally, degree by degree. On the 11th day, Leon Crane fell through river ice. The Charlie River, frozen but not solid, concealed pockets of weakness beneath snow. He stepped onto what appeared to be firm ground and dropped instantly into water cold enough to stop the heart. Survival in those conditions is measured in seconds. He clawed his way out using arms that no longer fully obeyed him, dragging himself onto the bank. His clothing froze solid almost immediately, locking him inside a shell of ice. Hypothermia at this stage is not cold, it is exhaustion. The body diverts blood away from extremities to protect the core, sacrificing fingers and toes to preserve the brain and heart. He could barely move. His hands, already frostbitten, were now completely useless, blackened claws incapable of gripping anything. He knew he had minutes, perhaps less, to build a fire. Using his forearms and teeth, he gathered kindling. Using his elbows, he struck sparks from a salvaged lighter. The first attempt failed. The second failed. The third caught. He did not remove his frozen clothes. Removing them would expose skin to air and accelerate heat loss. Instead, he sat as close to the flames as he dared, letting the fire thaw the ice slowly. Steam rose from his body. Pain returned as circulation resumed, a searing agony in his fingers and feet. He did not cry out. He had no audience.
Pain was simply another condition to be managed. When his clothes had thawed enough to move in, he continued walking. The fall through the ice marked a threshold. After that, his body began to fail systemically. His feet, encased in disintegrating boots, developed severe frostbite. Blisters formed, then burst, then froze again. Walking became a process of controlled limping, each step a negotiation with tissue that no longer functioned correctly. His face swelled, skin splitting in places, freezing in others. He could no longer feel his nose or ears. When he touched them, they felt like wood. Food became an obsession, not in the sense of craving, but in the sense of calculation. The human body can survive weeks without food if it has water and warmth. He had neither. His body was consuming itself, burning muscle and fat to generate heat. He tried eating bark, spruce needles, anything that might contain calories. Most of it made him sick. He caught no animals. He had no tools to trap or kill them. He found no berries, no roots, nothing edible in the frozen landscape. By the third week, hallucinations began. Not dramatic visions, but small distortions. Trees at a distance looked like buildings. Shadows suggested movement where there was none. His mind, starved and oxygen-deprived, was creating patterns from noise. He recognized this and did not trust what he saw until he had confirmed it by touch. The distinction between real and unreal narrowed. Only physical contact remained reliable. He did not think about rescue. Rescue required luck, and luck was not a variable he could control. He thought only about the next mile, the next fire, the next dawn. Survival compressed into a series of immediate problems, each solved just well enough to permit the next. There was no grand strategy, no inspiring revelation. There was only repetition, the same actions performed again and again under conditions that worsened daily.
On the 43rd day, Leon Crane saw smoke. It rose thin and vertical from a point perhaps 2 miles downstream. He had learned not to trust his eyes, but smoke was difficult to hallucinate. It moved, dispersed, reformed. It had direction. He walked toward it, forcing his body to comply despite exhaustion so profound it felt like drowning. The cabin appeared gradually, resolving from forest into structure. It was small, log-built, set back from the river in a clearing. Smoke rose from a metal chimney. Someone was inside. He approached slowly, unsure if his voice would work, unsure if he would be believed. When he knocked, the door opened. A trapper named Albert Ames stood in the doorway, staring at the figure before him. Leon Crane did not look human. His face was blackened, swollen, split in places where frostbite had destroyed tissue. His hands were skeletal, fingers frozen into rigid claws. His clothing hung in tatters, held together with cordage and desperation. He could barely speak, his voice a rasp shaped more by will than by vocal cords. Ames pulled him inside without hesitation. The warmth of the cabin was agonizing. Blood rushed back into frozen tissue, bringing pain so severe that Crane nearly lost consciousness. Ames did not ask questions. He prepared food, heated water, wrapped Crane in blankets. It was not generosity in the sentimental sense. It was competence, the practiced efficiency of someone who understood what cold could do. He assessed the damage methodically. Severe frostbite in hands and feet,
malnutrition, dehydration, probable infection. Crane would live, but he would lose fingers and toes. Ames had no radio, no way to contact the outside world. The nearest settlement was Woodchopper, a small mining camp roughly 40 miles downriver. The trail was passable, but Crane could not walk it. Ames fashioned a sled and prepared supplies. On the morning of the third day, they set out together. Ames pulling the sled, Crane wrapped and immobilized, watching the sky. The journey to Woodchopper took 5 days. From there, word reached Fairbanks. A small plane arrived to transport Crane to a military hospital. He had been missing for 81 days. The Army had presumed him dead. No search had been conducted after the first week. The terrain was considered too hostile, the odds too remote. His survival had not been expected.
Leon Crane lost all of his toes and parts of several fingers to frostbite. The amputations were performed in stages, removing only tissue that could not recover. The surgeries left him with limited manual dexterity and chronic pain that would persist for the rest of his life. He was medically discharged from the Army and returned to civilian life, carrying injuries that marked him visibly and permanently. He did not speak often about what had happened. When asked, his answers were factual, stripped of drama. He described the cold, the walking, the fires built with ruined hands. He did not describe fear, because fear had not been a useful variable. He did not describe despair, because despair would have required the luxury of reflection, and reflection was a resource he could not afford. He had simply continued, one decision after another, until continuation was no longer necessary. Historians later analyzed his route and confirmed that he had traveled more than 80 miles through some of the most inhospitable terrain in North America, in winter, without equipment, without food, and without any realistic prospect of success. Survival experts studying the case noted that nearly every decision he made was correct, not in the sense of optimal, but in the sense of sufficient. He had not done everything right. He had simply avoided doing anything catastrophically wrong. What remained after Leon Crane's survival was not inspiration in the conventional sense. It was evidence. Evidence that human beings, when reduced to core function, are capable of sustained action under conditions that should preclude it. Evidence that competence, when applied methodically, can outweigh circumstance. Evidence that survival is not always about strength or luck, but about the refusal to stop calculating, to stop moving, to stop solving the immediate problem in front of you. He lived for many years after his ordeal, quietly and without fanfare. He did not write a book. He did not seek recognition. The story survived primarily through military records and the accounts of those who had helped him. It is a story that resists embellishment, because embellishment would diminish it. What Leon Crane endured requires no exaggeration. It requires only attention. For 81 days he walked through winter, methodically, without witnesses, solving each problem as it arose. That he survived says less about heroism than about persistence. And persistence, exercised alone, without applause, without certainty, remains one of the most quietly extraordinary capacities of the human mind. If stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you see the world differently, consider supporting the channel. Like the video, subscribe, and join us for more true stories of survival, resilience, and the extraordinary limits of the human spirit.